Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the FTTC podcast, sponsored by Roman. It's not always a punishment when you finish last. We are your home for breaking news and breaking balls in the fantasy sports world. From touchdowns to tailgates, we've got it all covered with a dash of witty banter. I'm your host, Jason Stankiewicz, and later on today, I'll be joined by the FTTC's current seller gremlin, Mr. Billy Rahali, the last place man at the moment. And today's podcast, though, we're going to speak with Stinky Pete and get his take on how he's dealing with the media fire around his early season performance, but not before we whip around the league to discuss all the FTTC results of Week 4. We'll also examine some potential Week 5 transactions we could see, whether it's a trade or a waiver. And on that note, let's get to it. So moving on to the matchups from Week 4, it was a generally less competitive week than we've seen, with really only one close matchup. Kicking things off, Take a Stand, taking their first L to the podcast host, Mr. Stinky, coming out, putting up a big week. I think we honestly learned more about Take a Stand this week, though, than we did about my team. We learned that Christian McCaffrey probably should have been the 1-1, because that man is going out, he's putting up points. He had 30 points in the first half. Ended up putting, I think, 45 points here. Just a crazy performance from him. Really kept Take a Stand in it. Outside of McCaffrey and Kyron Williams, not a great week for Take a Stand. Kind of a letdown. Chris Olave, less than a point. Just, not his best performance. Take a Stand, though, still one of the powerhouse teams. Has most points scored, most points against. So clearly has been in some power matchups and winning those matchups, but could not get it done this week. Kyron Williams, though, maybe the waiver wire pickup of the year. I mean, that man's getting almost all the touches for the Rams. Ronnie Rivers catching a carry here and there, but for the most part, Kyron Williams is carrying the load and doing so well for Team Take a Stand. And on the other side for Stinky, Jake Elliott has been probably the player of the year. 2 18-point performances, 2 11-point performances. That kicker is putting up more points than a lot of running backs. And so Jake Elliott, LTHS hero, but also presently a Stinky hero. Moving on to the next matchup from Week 4, we had Nice Catch Blanco Nino knock off Vic Vinegar, 118-82. And let me tell you, Vic Vinegar, man, I think that man just is outthinking himself. He's in his head. He doesn't know which way to go. He doesn't know whether left is right, right is left. He doesn't know which way is up or down. Man's heading south when he's trying to go north. But, the big thing for their matchup, I think, to highlight, after blowing all that money on Mr. HN in Miami, Vic Vinegar chose not to start him. And that was obviously to his detriment. A big 25-point performance on his bench. Vic Vinegar, 77 points on his bench. Granted, he lost by almost 40 points, so it would have made a difference. He could have pulled it out, but it would have been tough. But he's outthinking himself. He can't have any confidence in his decisions as manager at the moment. He's got one of the best teams in the league, and it's just a matter of playing the right players each week, and that can be kind of tough when you have a team that's just full of depth. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but if I'm Vic Vinegar, I got to think I'm trying to swing a 2-for-1, a 3-for-2, something to get reliable top players that make my decisions easier to make on a weekly basis. On the other side, you have a team that's built entirely on top players. Nice Catch Blanco Nino, carried by 3 players, Josh Allen, Justin Jefferson, and Puka Nacua. Outside of those players, his team is really not that good. And it's really just those guys who are carrying the load. Tyler Lockett, disappointing. Joe Mixon, disappointing. Josh Kelly, disappointing. George Kittle, disappointing. Kicker and defense, not great. Not a lot of points on the bench. I think Nice Catch Blanco Nino thus far is sneaking by. I wouldn't be surprised to see some changes in the near future. That man, as we know, is a swindler when it comes to trades. So let's keep an eye out on him. In our next matchup, it was the closest matchup of the week. Strickland Propate, 109. Team DS, 108. Strickland Propane came out of nowhere to steal it late. Though when you look at the roster decisions, had they played Nico Collins, Mr. Prentice runs away with it, wins it pretty easily. Nico Collins, big 32 points on the Strickland Propane bench, but Debo, a disappointing 0.6, didn't matter. Strickland Propane still able to pull it out on Team DS side. Pat Frymouth, if he doesn't get hurt, who knows what happens. maybe they end up pulling it out. But looking at these matchups a little bit, Propane's got a pretty decent team. A lot of wide receiver depth there. I will say, though, the running backs could use some improvement. They could be another team to look at to make a move. And again, we'll chat on that a little bit later. Team DS, kind of the first letdown week of the year for them. Team just really didn't come out. I know they put up 108 points, but it did not feel like it. Top players didn't perform. And if you take away David Montgomery's 33-point performance, it's a pretty weak performance from the rest of the team. Moving on here to our next matchup, though, we have Mike's Lucky Charm against Auto Draft Bot Squad, and the Bot Squad did not show up again. Sitting 1-3, 11th place right now, only ahead of Mr. Stinky Pete by 2 points in terms of points for. This one was 117-86. Mike's Lucky Charm just looking strong. A strong squad. They lost a couple close ones. Could very easily be 4-0 if things went slightly differently. Credit to that manager, Mr. Johnson, did a nice job with his draft this year, was putting in some extra prep work before the season, and clearly it's paid off with a pretty deep team, especially at the running back position. One of the deeper teams in the running back position, and honestly the wide receiver position as well, with Terry McLaurin on the bench. They could be a prime candidate to watch. Again, similar to Vic Vinegar, it could be a 2-for-1 situation where Mike's Lucky Charm is really trying to get another stud in there. Moving on to the next matchup here, we had Jordy's Ghost against Sneaky Pete, who, again, we've come to expect not that much from this year after some abysmal trades early on. But Jordy's Ghost, 119, Sneaky Pete, 76. Jordy's Ghost just cruising along right now. The bench is pretty limited, but a pretty strong starting lineup, getting some solid contributions from Brandon Ayuk, Josh Jacobs, and 27 points from the Dallas defense. Anytime you get 27 points from defense, it's going to be tough to lose if the rest of your team does anything. Travis Kelce hasn't quite hit a stride yet, 9 points still, though. You can expect more from him in the coming weeks, especially with Miss Swift attending his games. You got to think he'll be motivated, and Patrick Mahomes will be motivated to give him the ball. Sneaky Pete just refuses to play Romeo Doubs, who continues to go off on his bench. Another 14 points there, would be his highest receiver of the week. Might have been the highest receiver last week as well. So you got to think that Sneaky Pete will be looking to get him in his lineup soon. And Sneaky Pete had a tough week with defensive kicker of net 0 points. You got to think that this manager is looking to make a move from Mr. Holly. I mean, he's got a weak squad. He's got some assets that he can work with, try and move, try and get some more depth in there. Could be a good partner for Vic Vinegar. Or Mike's Lucky Charm, trying to build up some depth. But the problem, I think, with Sneaky Pete's roster as well is that he's starting to build up a lot of dud assets. The Tyler Algier trade has not worked out. He's looking pretty droppable. Dalvin Cook, pretty droppable. Holding 2 defenses, 2 quarterbacks. I think Sneaky Pete's misplaying his roster a little bit and not giving himself a lot of leeway. But anyway, on to our final match of the week. Before I move on, Sneaky Pete is this week's Village Idiot of the Week. Did have to do a shotgun this morning. More on that later. But moving on to our last matchup of the week, the Disasters finally fell, putting up 79 points. Lost to Roadrunners Naz, coming out with a victory. 106 points for Roadrunners Naz. Bouncing back a little bit. Honestly, a solid week for their team, just across the board. George Pickens, the only kind of mediocre performance. Kyle Pitts, it's just bad at this point. He's not getting any opportunity. But otherwise, put up some points. Maybe a slight blip of hope for Roadrunners Naz. But the Disasters, just Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. His stack just isn't working out for him. Najee did finally put up double-digit points, but I got to wonder, is there enough of a ceiling on Najee? I've been going in on him all year, and that's just because I don't think that there's a high ceiling there. I think he's a purgatory player. He's that guy that's too good to drop, but not good enough to start on a weekly basis because he doesn't have that 20-point performance potential. And his 10 points at the running back position really going to win it for you? Probably not. But anyway, that was our whip around of matchups for week 4. As always, we'll get back to our matchups for week 5 after the following weekend. But let's move on to what I'm going to call the transaction ticker. Now, we're starting to get to that point of the year where you can expect teams to make moves. We're starting to see who's got good teams, who's got weak teams, who has some depth that they can move on for a bigger player, and who's maybe looking to swing a bigger player just to survive, try to get out of that last hole. There was some interesting news in the FTTC group this morning. Roadrunners Naz was looking to put Anthony Richardson on the trade block. I think a lot of teams have quarterbacks right now. Quarterbacks tend not to be that valuable to trade for, but you got to think Take a Stand might be tempted. They're the only team that has so far streamed quarterbacks. Brock Purdy actually did have a pretty good performance for him, but he's got the resources. Maybe he can swing a deal. I know he doesn't like trading, but they could be a good trade partner match. Moving on, we mentioned Strickland Propane could be looking to sell high on some of his players, consolidate some of that depth, and do some top players, especially at the wide receiver position. Maybe Strickland Propane's looking to sell high on Nico Collins. 32 points on the bench, and honestly, there's not really room in the starting lineup for him. It could be a good player that he could be looking to move. And, Strickland Propane's rocking with the corpse of Gus Edwards in the RB slot. You got to think that he's looking to change that because nobody wants to be starting Gus Edwards. That's just a painful start on a weekly basis. It's not going to go well. Another team, though, who's looking for an RB, nice catch, Blanco Nino. Could he be looking to swing one of his big three for an RB? He's pretty challenged in that department. Josh Kelly, one of the worst waiver pickups of the year, has really done nothing but kick him in the sack for 4 weeks now. I kind of think Vic Vinegar could be a good trade partner there. Given his RB depth, they could look to mix something up. I will say that, the commissioner is a noted trade swindler, so I'd advise the league to be careful trading with him. He tends to get to this point of the year where he makes a move that just absolutely swindles someone and gets the season back on track. We'll see if that happens this year, but I got to think he's looking to make a move sooner rather than later. Finally, the last team I want to talk about, I mentioned a little bit earlier, Mike's Lucky Charm. I think we could look to see them make a move. As I mentioned before, it's that time of year where someone makes a bad trade and ruins their season. It's possible Sneaky Pete's already done that, but could we see Mike's Lucky Charm do that? I mean, I know that I mentioned that they should consolidate some depth potentially and try and get a top player. He could also just hold pat. It's a good team right now. I don't know that there's a lot of reason to move a player on other than to try and get a real top player. So if he's not getting a top 5, top 6 player, I don't know that there's necessarily a reason to make a deal. But moving on, we got week 5 waivers coming up tonight. I'm not sure that we're going to see big movements, but I could see potentially a big move on Jaleel McLaughlin, the Denver running back. He's kind of the only one. He's really the only running back right now out in the waiver pool. There's a lot of RB needy squads. I could see him being a bit of an overbid. I think we'll be surprised at the number that he gets picked up at. I think someone will drop more money on Josh Reynolds. I don't know why. With Jameson Williams coming back, I think that's probably not the best move. And then finally, will CJ Stroud find a home? Is someone going to pick up another extra quarterback? Or will they be looking to stream him at some point in the future as we start to get into some of the bye weeks here? But on that note, specifically on the note of transactions, I think it's time we hear from a man whose team could use some help. All right, I am joined here this evening by the FTTC's current seller gremlin, the man who was Sneaky Pete, but we are now formally calling him Stinky Pete due to his Stinky team's performance, Mr. Billy Rahali. Bill, how you doing?
We can't really argue with that right now. I'm feeling blue. I'm feeling low.
Well, there's plenty of time to bounce back, but I will say, just to jump right into it here, there's been a lot of criticism in the media of your management this season. You feeling that's justified?
What I will say is that the mainstream media loves to convolute messages, and it's very clear from the responses of some in the league that there's an agenda that can be furthered with my demise. And so the more that I lose, the more hyperbolic the descriptions of those losses will be. That's something I'm used to, Jess. That's something that I'm going to be, used to as we go forward. And it does motivate the players. Now, on paper, we got to be better. All 3 phases, we've got to be better. And it's as simple as that. You look across the team, no one's even really been a consistent producer on the roster besides young Bijan. And, even for a first round pick, he's not breaking down any walls. He's given me a solid double digit 12 to 18 each week, but that's not going to cut it if I don't get some contributions from other guys. And there are going to be some other guys that'll step up, but until that happens, I'd say the criticism itself is justified. Painting me into the sphere of worst team in the league might be a little much.
I don't know. I mean, you are sitting at the bottom right now, but there's one thing I want to touch on in what you just mentioned. You mentioned that some out there are using you to further an agenda. What agenda might you be speaking of?
Well, the league likes to see me in the mud. The league likes to see me suffer. They know that I won't take it nicely. They know that I'll have a wisecrack to offer in return. And even something when I'm people forget I'm an honorable member of the league in spite of my difficulties over these last few years. If you refer back to one of the shotgun videos that I did last year, there was quite a bit more spillage. And on the video, I held my hand up and said, that's not going to cut it. I'm going to do it again. And then I did it again. So for me to be painted as someone who doesn't know where the hole should go on the can, I'll admit to you, I didn't know that you were supposed to turn the can upside down. I thought you were supposed to hold it horizontal like a hot dog and just poke in there. So, hand up on that portion of it. But all in all, I think it really does just come down to, some members of the league, they just like to watch the world burn. And as Alfred told us, the only way you can really deal with those folks is to push on. They can't be reasoned with, bought, or bullied, as Michael Caine reminded us. And so with that, I'm just going to take it on the chin. I'm going to keep moving forward and looking for ways to win football games.
Well, you mentioned your shotgun performance earlier today. Now, I have a few comments from my wife here after watching the video that I wanted
God.
That I wanted to toss out there, and I want to get your response to them.
Unbelievable that you're okay. All right, here we go, Jess. I just hope you know you're opening this door. I didn't even knock. You literally opened it up and said, "Come on in." So,
all right. Well, here's what we got. These are direct quotes from her as she's watching the video. Quote: "Why is his form so terrible? He's spilling more of the beer than he's drinking." And the other one, quote: "Why is he wearing socks? Are they now soaked with beer?" Any response to those two?
Yeah, I'll start with the end. They were wet. What did I spill more than I drank? No, absolutely not. As was evidenced by when the video finished, I almost threw up right there in the shower. Really, really close. I mean, as close as I've come in one of these. The form I've already addressed. I'll learn. I'll take it forward. The guys, they've got my back in the same way I've got theirs. They're going to continue to look for ways to win football games, as I said. And we really want to be talking about the football. But I will say, Kathleen is going to hear about this, and it's not going to be pretty. We're just going to leave it at that, okay? We're just going to leave it at that.
Well, I got one more for you from her. This is less related to your shotgun performance, but she wanted me to ask this. She was dying to know. She said, quote, "Can I please have his take on Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift?"
I think it's kind of funny. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Like, Pacheco scores a 55-yard touchdown run, and the first cut of the camera is to Taylor Swift.
Yeah, trying to get her reaction. No, that's the key piece.
It's clearly just like they can get an additional market share for a short amount of time. And even that short amount of time, I think there was something I read that was like they got a 53% bump in teenage girls watching the NFL in a week, which I realize is already probably a low bar to clear. But even so, I was like, wow, that's not surprising with how much they've hammered it home, but it's going to die out as everything does. So I'm looking forward for the end, like being like a really big dramatic thing more than I am like seeing her on the TV every week. But yes, I know Kelly loves Taylor Swift. I'm going to start bashing Taylor Swift now after some of these questions from Kathleen. Loaded questions. Objection.
I think they're fair, and if she didn't ask him, I think I would have. The rest of the league might have. But moving on back to the football, back to your team a little bit here. Now, we've already seen you make one big trade. You made a couple big waiver moves. In my last podcast, I mentioned that I thought the Josh Palmer acquisition was a massive overpay, but I did give you some credit for the Jalen Warren acquisition. Are there any more trades or big waiver pickups in the near future for Sneaky Pete as they try to bounce back?
Well, I will see about Mr. Palmer, Jess. I do need to remind you that he dropped a 40-yard touchdown in addition to his 9.5 points or whatever he put up. But I'm hoping that he'll fill the void that Mike Williams is going to leave. I know that Mr. Johnston has been getting some target share as well, along with Donald Parham, the tight end. I think the Chargers are going to be the Chargers of old, and if Eckler doesn't play, I think they might have to rely on throwing the ball more, but we'll see. Jalen Warren, meh. I mean, the Steelers' offense looks anemic. I really don't know what everybody saw in Najee Harris. He breaks off some good runs. He's very clearly an athlete, but I don't see him being a feature back in the NFL if he isn't already developing that way, which it doesn't look like he is. I've got my eyes on some vulnerabilities within the league, whether that's free agents that haven't been addressed or maybe a couple players that are currently undervalued, not seeing starting rosters that I might make a move for. But, looking at my schedule, I go against Auto Draft Bot Squad 2 weeks from now, and I believe this week, I just looked at it before. It's another...
You got Roadrunners Naz this week, so
Yeah,
another
right.
battle for the bottom here.
Yeah. So I'm thinking if I can win both of those, I go to 3-3. Then I've got a tough pair of games against Strickland Propane and I think it's Take a Stand after that. 2 solid rosters. Don't expect to win both of those games. If I could win one of them, stay at 4-4. That's the best case scenario. That's what the guys are going to be shooting for. I mean, this might be a year with everything going on in the league that 7-7 gets you a playoff spot. So keeping your head above water for me is really the goal. I did not. I said it to Tim before the draft to Daddy Spooks, Poppy Spooks, that I thought that my draft was really poor, and he said explicitly, "You didn't lose the league with your draft." Thought it was solid. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And I really feel like my ceiling was always limited. I mean, Tua could have a big game, but CeeDee Lamb is not a true wide receiver 1 because Dak Prescott is the most overpaid quarterback in the league. Don't have too much else. Pittsburgh D is looking like it can get carved open. If they can concede 20-plus points to the Texans, I really don't know what to expect. So ultimately, I think it's going to be one of those things where I'm going to need a couple of big weeks against the good teams, squeak out a couple of wins against teams where maybe I don't need as many points, maybe be in the conversation for that 5th, 6th seed, depending on what happens. I have played 3 of the top 4 teams in the league already. What that does mean, though, is that I see 2 of those 3 on the back end. Actually, I only see one of the 2, but we'll see.
It's
not over.
Still a tough turn in the schedule. I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm a little pessimistic for you. I think this could be a Mr. Holly planning a golf trip.
Yeah, I mean, Jess, you've got ample experience with the bottom of the barrel, so I'll take you at your word when you say that something is stinky. If my name does change to Stinky Pete, it will only be after I've seen enough. And I haven't seen enough yet. I still have faith in some of these guys to put up some weeks that'll win me some games, some football games. But we'll see.
Well, clearly enough, you're keeping the hope, and maybe you bounce back. But one last item I want to get from you here. There were some rumors floating around this morning that Sneaky P was spending a lot of time talking to India, which has also floated some other rumors that potentially you're looking to sell off the squad to an offshore conglomerate. Any truth to those rumors that Sneaky Pete before the season was looking at a new home, and now they're speaking to some offshore companies, offshore resources? Is there a future for Sneaky Pete?
I did
or elsewhere?
I did kick the tires on that, Jess, and I can tell you that none of the Saudis were interested in my roster.
Well, it's a lot of garbage right now, so I don't blame them. They tend to invest in decent clubs, decent teams, and decent management. So anyway, Bill, thank you so much for coming on today. We've roasted you a lot throughout the year, but we appreciate you sticking with us, and hopefully it's your chance to do some roasting sometime soon. So best of luck for the future, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks, Jess. You don't want to see Steely Pete, I'll tell you that, because if I break off a series of wins here, Sneaky Pete might evolve rather than devolve into Stinky Pete. The prime form of Sneaky Pete is Steely Pete, like Steely Dan.
Well, we'll see if Steely Pete
Watch
makes an
out.
appearance, but
We'll see.
to date, I think we're more expecting Sticky Pete. But thanks again, Bill, and we'll catch you later.
We'll catch you later.
Well, there it is from Mr. Holly. And with that, we have another solid week in the bag. Thank you so much for tuning into the FTTC podcast, your home for fantasy sports news. We look forward to another good week of football. We'll catch up with you again after week 5. As always, I'm your host, Jason Stankiewicz. Until next time.